Hello everybody, thank you for joining me for another tier list. Today we're going to be going through the discography of The Smiths, one of the great rock bands to come out of England, and a group that contributed some of the best music of the entire decade of the 80s, in my opinion. And although they were only a band for a relatively short period of time, they delivered so many top quality songs and great albums that will forever be timeless and have clearly left their mark on British indie rock music. And in addition to their amazing songwriting, they were also a group where each member contributed so much from an instrumental and lyrical standpoint, with Johnny Marr's very tasteful and unique guitar writing, Andy Rourke's very tasteful and supportive bass lines, Morrissey's beautiful sense of melody, as well as his amazing lyrical writing, which oftentimes pushed the boundaries and delved into subject matters that were considered taboo for the time. And of course, Mike Joyce was a rock-solid drummer and somebody who was an integral part to the Smiths' sound. And I gotta say, this was a very hard album ranking for me to make because I don't think they have a bad record, and those are always the hardest bands to make tier lists of because it feels wrong choosing a least favorite Smiths album because there's a negative connotation with that wording. But just to get it out there in the open, I do not think any of their albums are bad by any stretch, and I consider them to have one of the most consistent discographies of any group from their time. So what I'm going to do today is go through their 4 studio albums, and I will also be including the compilation albums Hatful of Hollow and Louder Than Bombs, which a lot of people seem to include when they rank their discography, even though they're technically not studio albums and they do have some repeated songs. But I do think both of them offer a different type of listening experience, and I think they hold an interesting place within their discography, so I'm going to be including those 2 compilation albums as well. And I will score each of them on this tier list, with S being the highest and D being the lowest, and I'll talk a little bit about each album, let you know my thoughts, and we will see where we end up. And please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree, and how you would rank these 6 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. Alright, I think that's about it. Let's jump right into it. Okay, starting out, we have their debut studio album from 1984, which is a self-titled album, The Smiths, and I will give this an A. I think this is a very good debut record, but not my favorite from their discography. I do think they have other records that would follow it that are even better, and this one would actually go down as my least favorite Smiths album. So the lowest score we're going to have in this video is an A, which is the mark of a very strong discography. But I do really enjoy most of this record. I just think that their songwriting and production do get even more interesting and further enhanced on future records, but this album certainly still has some great qualities to it and a lot of amazing tracks. It's 10 songs long with 5 tracks on each side. I'm going off of the UK version for this one, but the US version has an additional 6th track on side 2 with This Charming Man, which closes off the album, but for this I'm just going to be sticking with the original UK release. For side 1, the 2 standout tracks for me would be the opener, Reel Around the Fountain, which kickstarts the record beautifully, and in my opinion is one of the best songs from this album. Just the perfect introduction into the very lush and atmospheric vibes that the Smiths songs elicit, and I love the piano and organ parts that are added into this track. It gives us some very beautiful additional textures. And my other favorite from side 1 would be Pretty Girls Make Graves, a super tasteful song and a great example of the awesome bass and drum grooves between Andy and Mike. And while I do enjoy a lot of side 1, I do think side 2 takes a step up in terms of momentum and quality of tracks. I think all 5 tracks are great from front to back, with my favorites being What Difference Does It Make, which I think is hands down the best track from this record. Such a tasteful and groovy guitar and drum part, and just a beautiful and classic Morrissey vocal melody on top of it. I also love the opening track, Still Ill, which has a great drive to it and has some of my favorite Johnny Marr guitar parts from this entire record. And I also really enjoy the final track, Suffer Little Children. I like the chill vibe of this track, and I think it concludes the record very nicely. My main reasoning for putting this in A tier and ranking it as my least favorite Smiths album is just the fact that it does have a couple of tracks that I find to be some of the lesser interesting songs in the grand scheme of their full discography. Not to say they're bad tracks, but if I'm comparing them to their other records, the songs that don't really stand out to me as much are Miserable Lie and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Also, in comparison to the remainder of the Smiths catalog, this album would have the least amount of tracks that would make my top 10 favorite Smiths song list, with the only one that would definitely make that list being What Difference Does It Make, and possibly Reel Around the Fountain, but I would have to think about that one more. But certainly not a bad album by any stretch, and music that I think was very refreshing and sounded unlike anything else to come out of the year 1984, and it was a great starting point for an incredible discography to continue to build off of. So a very good debut record. I will give this an A. Alright, next we have their first compilation album from 1984 titled Hatful of Hollow. Technically not a studio album, but like I said, a lot of people regard this as one of the important records of their discography and do include it in their album rankings, so I figured it was only right to include this one. And I will give this one an S. I think this is a fantastic record. This compilation features a collection of B-sides as well as alternate takes of singles and songs from the debut record, some of which being from the John Peel and David Jensen sessions. And although it does feature some repeat songs from album 1, I do think there are enough new unheard songs on here to balance it out. It's 16 tracks long, and 6 of these songs were alternate recordings of tracks from the first album, the majority of which happen on side 1. Side 1 is 8 tracks long, featuring 4 songs from the first album, which are What Difference Does It Make, This Charming Man, Hand in Glove, and Still 3, all of which are amazing tracks, and it is cool to hear these different versions, some of which are in different keys, and the production is much different and provides a nice alternative to the more raw production style of the first record. And the remainder of side 1 features 4 additional tracks, opening very strongly with William, It Was Really Nothing, the perfect opener, beautiful vocal work, very cool guitar parts with some unorthodox chord movements, and definitely one of the standout tracks on this album for me. And then another standout track from side 1 is How Soon Is Now. I absolutely love that track, and I particularly love all of the different tones and textures going on within the guitar parts. It really just takes you over and brings you into a completely different world. And I also particularly love the guitar work on Handsome Devil. Side 2 then delivers 8 more tracks, with 2 being from the first album, which are You've Got Everything Now and Reel Around the Fountain. Again, both great song choices. I will say though, I do enjoy the debut album version of Reel Around the Fountain a little bit more. I think the guitars sound better and are much more prevalent on that particular version. All of the remaining 6 songs on side 2 are amazing, but the standout ones for me would be Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want, Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, The Night Has Opened My Eyes, and Back to the Old House, which is a very beautiful stripped down acoustic guitar and vocal track that provides some beautiful contrast to the more full band tracks. And I just think this entire track listing is incredibly solid. I think all of the already released songs that they included are all some of the strongest songs from the first album, and the remainder of the B-sides and singles that make up the other 10 tracks are all very consistent, and there's a good handful of really exceptional Smiths songs throughout this, with tracks like William, It Was Really Nothing, How Soon Is Now, Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, Girl Afraid, and Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want. So an amazing compilation album with countless Smith tracks that are timeless all throughout it. This one gets an easy S. Alright, next we have their second studio album from 1985 titled Meat is Murder, and this one gets an easy S. I love this record. I think everything on here is an improvement from the self-titled release. I think the production is further enhanced. Musically, I find these songs more intriguing. Lyrically, they delve into some more political and social matters, and as an overall album, I just think the track listing is more consistent than it was on the self-titled record, and it has more standout and exceptional tracks that would make my top 10 favorite Smiths song list. It's 9 tracks long, with 5 songs on side 1 and 4 tracks on side 2. Side 1 opens up with The Headmaster Ritual, which is in my opinion the best opening track of any Smiths album. A song with an amazing drive to it, really tasteful guitar parts, and lyrically delving into some critiques of the English education system and corporal punishment. A song that is both very interesting musically and lyrically, and the perfect opening track to this second studio album. My other 2 favorite tracks from side 1 would be That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which is hands down my favorite song from this record, and believe it or not, it would even make my top 5 favorite Smiths song list. Something about the vibe of that song and the very colorful chord progressions just put me in another dimension when I listened to it. I just love that track so much. And another standout from side 1 for me would be I Want the One I Can't Have, a very vibey song with tasteful guitar parts and very pretty vocal melodies. Side 2 then delivers another amazing 4 tracks that all do a great job of contrasting one another, which keeps things very exciting and unpredictable. I love all 4 of these tracks, but if I had to pick 2 favorites, I would go with Well, I Wonder, which has some awesome bass lines that do a great job of showcasing Andy Rourke, and I love the layering of the acoustic and electric guitars against those bass parts, which create some very beautiful textures. And then my other favorite would have to be the title track, Meat is Murder, a very sad and dreary song that introduces us to a different side of the Smiths sound. I would say this is probably the darkest song that they've written up to this point in their discography, but I really resonate with that dark side of their songwriting. And with the main theme of this song being about killing animals, I would imagine that this song had to be pretty ahead of its time for 1985, as vegetarianism was nowhere near as common back then as it is today. And I really like the placement of this song being the final track on the album. It has a very different energy to the opening track, and I think concluding this record with this song was the perfect choice. But like I said, I think everything on this record was enhanced in comparison to the first record. I think the production is better, it's got a stronger track listing, and for me it has more standout individual songs with 3 tracks that would make my top 10 Smiths song list, with the Headmaster Ritual, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, and Meat is Murder. So an amazing album. This one gets an easy S. Okay, moving on, we have their third studio album from 1986 titled The Queen is Dead, and this is another one that gets an easy S. I absolutely love this record. This one goes down as my favorite Smiths album. I think this one is an almost perfect record from front to back. I think it has the most cohesive feel of all of their records, but at the same time it still has enough variety to keep things interesting, but nothing really seems out of place. The songwriting is incredible, and it contains multiple tracks that I would regard as some of my favorite Smiths songs. And in general, I think it's just a very easy listen at 36 minutes in length and 10 tracks long with 5 songs on each side. I think side 1 is perfect, opening up with the title track, which has a nice drive to it, but also has a dark edge. And then frankly, Mr. Shankly does a nice job of changing up the mood a bit, but in a very tasteful way that, in my opinion, does not sound forced. And I've always thought that this song has some pretty cool instrumental timbres going on. Then it goes into I Know It's Over, which gives us that classic down-tempo, moody Smiths vibe with pretty chord movements and those classic Johnny Marr arpeggiated guitar parts. Never Had No One Ever has a really great intensity to it and some super cool grooves between the guitar, bass, and drums. And then Cemetery Gates concludes side 1 with a very beautiful and euphoric track that also has a nice drive to it. And I think all 5 of these songs serve an important purpose and work off of one another very nicely. If I had to pick 2 favorites from side 1, I would go with Never Had No One Ever and The Queen is Dead. Side 2 then delivers 5 more tracks, and almost all of these were released as singles, so it almost plays through like a greatest hits album, opening up with the beautiful and moody track Big Mouth Strikes Again, an incredible song with great guitar parts from Johnny Marr, and I love the tambourine. It adds a nice little additional texture to this amazing song. And then they continue with The Boy with the Thorn in His Side, another absolutely beautiful track, and each of these songs just work off of one another so well, and to me this is one of those records where as I'm listening to it, I'm just constantly amazed at how much beauty there is all throughout this track listing. But after that, we have the one song from this album that I've never been crazy about, Vicar in Tutu. To me, this is the only song on this record that feels a little bit out of place stylistically. I don't think it works well with everything else on this album, and it pains me to say that because, like I said, I do think this album is almost perfect, and if it wasn't for this one track, I would say that this is a perfect record. But unfortunately, I've never been able to get into that one song. But after that, we have one of the most classic Smiths songs of all time, There Is a Light That Never Goes Out. I would say that is probably their most popular song, and I know this is going to be a cliche choice, but it's probably my number 1 favorite Smiths song. I hate to take the most common choice for my favorite, but this song is just so incredible, and it's one of those tracks I can listen to over and over and over again and just never get tired part of it. And I think the chorus in particular is just exceptionally beautiful, both musically and lyrically. Just the ultimate love song, and one of the great songs to come out of the decade of the 80s, in my opinion. And then the album concludes with my second favorite track from this record, titled Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others. Again, another very pretty and very moody song with all sorts of cool guitar parts and arpeggiated riffs, and a song with a really nice drive to it, which concludes the record on a more moody note, but also has this really energetic sort of feel to it, which I really enjoy. So as an album, this one contains a large chunk of a lot of my favorite Smiths songs from their discography, and I think it's their most cohesive album with the most consistent track listing from front to back, with the only dip in momentum being the track Vicar in Tutu, which I could do without. But like I said, if it wasn't for that one track, I would say this is a perfect album and my favorite record from the Smiths discography. So this one gets an easy S. Okay, next we have another compilation album from 1987 titled Louder Than Bombs, and I will give this one an A. I love this album, but I do have a couple of small issues with it, which is ultimately why I bumped it down a tier, and I will get into those in a little bit. But I do think 90% of this record is incredible. But when it comes to compilations, I do prefer Hatful of Hollow over this one. This one is on the longer side with 24 tracks, and it features a good chunk of songs that were also on Hatful of Hollow, as well as their other compilation album, The World Won't Listen. And those two compilations weren't released in the United States, so this was meant to be a substitute for those. So a lot of people make the argument that you don't need to listen to Hatful of Hollow and you can just listen to Louder Than Bombs. But I do think they can be viewed as their own unique records, because although a lot of this record does feature most of the stuff from Hatful of Hollow, there are still a couple of tracks that are unique to Hatful of Hollow, like the songs How Soon Is Now and Handsome Devil. And I do think they are both much different types of listening experiences. With this one, I think there is more of a variety in mood and feel changes from track to track, with this one featuring a couple of probably the most upbeat songs of their discography. And these 24 tracks are divided up into 4 sides of music with 6 songs on each of them. And side 1 delivers 6 tracks, with my personal favorites being Shoplifters of the World Unite, Sweet and Tender Hooligan, and Is It Really So Strange. Side 2 delivers another 6 tracks, with my favorites being William, It Was Really Nothing, and Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now. For the 6 songs on side 3, my favorites are Oscillate Wildly, which is a very cool instrumental track, and I also love Rubber Ring and Back to the Old House, and it's nice to hear another interpretation of that track with the full band and electric guitars. For side 4, the standout tracks for me would be Hand in Glove, Please 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 Let Me Get What I Want, and Asleep, which is an awesome piano and vocal track that ends this compilation album in the most beautiful way possible. And even though I think the majority of the songs on here are incredible, I think because of the fact that it's on the longer side, there are a couple of tracks on here that I'm not crazy about and don't really resonate with me as much from a stylistic standpoint, with tracks like Sheila Take a Bow, London, Shakespeare's Sister, and Golden Lights, and ultimately that is why I bumped it down to A tier. Like I said before, I do prefer Hatful of Hollow more for a compilation record, and I think that one is more consistent from front to back, but this one certainly has a ton of amazing songs and some great alternate recordings and alternate productions of great tracks from Hatful of Hollow. So a very good compilation album. This one gets an A. Alright, and lastly, we have their 4th and final studio album from 1987 titled Strangeways, Here We Come, and this one will get an easy S. Another incredible record, and for me this one goes down as my second favorite Smiths album right after The Queen Is Dead. I really love the choices that they made on here, deciding to go into a more adventurous direction with lots of added instrumentations that we hadn't heard as much on previous records, with the addition of a string section and saxophones, both of which I believe are being done using synthesizers. And we also get some other exotic instruments on individual tracks like the marimba, auto harp, and harmonium. And in general, there's just a broader use of keyboards and synths throughout this record. And a lot of people say that you can hear the stylistic clash starting to happen between Morrissey and Johnny Marr. And while that is the case, I still think it resulted in some incredible songs and some of the most classic Smiths hits of all time. And all of those elements combined with the amazing production and top quality songwriting resulted in what I think is one of the best albums of the Smiths discography, and one that stylistically holds its own unique place amongst their other albums. It's 10 tracks long with 5 songs on each side, and very similar to The Queen is Dead, I think the track listing is almost perfect with the exception of one song that I'm not that crazy about. For side 1, my favorites would be Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One Before, which would easily make my top 5 favorite Smiths song list. A track that has everything that I want in a great Smiths song, really colorful and catchy vocal melodies, awesome chord progressions in the guitars, groovy bass and drum parts, and just an overall very lush and ethereal mood that just takes you over when you listen to it. My other 2 favorites from side 1 would be the opening 2 tracks, A Rush and a Push and The Land Is Ours, and I Started Something I Couldn't Finish. Side 2 starts out by taking a bit of a darker turn, which I really enjoy with the opening track, Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me. Easily my favorite track from side 2, and another one that would make my top 10 favorite Smiths song list. I love everything that's going on within this track, the really dark piano intro, which eventually goes into a 6/8 mid-tempo groove with these beautiful arpeggiated guitar parts and really colorful harmonic movements. And then the 2 songs that follow that I think are both incredible, with Unhappy Birthday and Paint a Vulgar Picture, which does a nice job of picking up the energy and mood a bit after the opening 2 tracks that were more on the sad side. And I love the closing track, I Won't Share You, which concludes things on a more stripped down moody track with beautiful auto harp parts by Johnny Marr that pair beautifully with Andy's supportive bass line, and it's just a very lush and tasteful track to conclude the Smiths discography. The one song from this record that I've never been able to get into is Death at One's Elbow. That's a track that stylistically just doesn't really resonate with me, and it's the one skip over track for me when I'm listening to this record, but I think the remainder of this album is so strong that it ultimately does not take away from the record very much, and I think the songwriting is just top notch all throughout this. It does a really great job of adding a little bit of variety into their sound, which makes for a nice conclusion to their discography, and it contains multiple tracks that would make my top 10 favorite Smiths song list, with Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One Before, and Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me. So another amazing record, my second favorite Smiths album. This one gets an easy S. Alright, so those are my takes on their 4 studio albums and the 2 compilation albums, Hatful of Hollow and Louder Than Bombs. And this was one of those discographies where I knew that they had a ton of great songs, but once I started revisiting these records and listening to all of them again, I was really in disbelief as to how many amazing tracks and albums they had produced in such a short period of time. And they are one of the very few groups that I would say do not have a bad album. And for the decade of the 80s, I would say they have one of the strongest discographies of any band to come out of that decade. And with a lot of older groups, oftentimes there is a part of me that hopes that they would get back together and make a reunion album or tour again. But with the Smiths, I really don't want them to do anything. I think their legacy speaks for itself, and I think they're at a point now where they should just leave everything as it is and just let their output speak for itself, because they have truly cemented themselves as one of the best rock bands to come out of England. And I'm very happy that I covered them for today's episode. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was enjoyable. And if you are interested, please feel free to check out some of my other tier lists linked in the comments and the description and see if there's anything else that you might like. And like I said at the beginning, please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree and how you would rank these 6 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. All right, that's it for today. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care.